Hi class. So this video is for Lab 3, and what we're going to do for Lab 3 is use SPSS to analyze data for an independent t-test. So I, in Lab 1, I showed you how to log on to SPSS, and so I wanted to go through this example of a study that we already talked about during the independent sample lecture. So just a reminder, what an independent sample is it's two separate sets of participants and looking at the difference between those participants. So for our example, whereas a dependent t-test is looking at the same participants going through different manipulations. So for the independent t-test, what we wanted to look at, we talked about a study where we had some students, high school students, who watched Sesame Street as children, and some students who did not watch Sesame Street as children. So we wanted to compare in this study what grades were for students who watched Sesame Street versus did not watch Sesame Street. So those are two different sets of participants, right? We have students who did watch Sesame Street as children, and then participants who did not watch Sesame Street as children. And in this sample, we had 10 students who watched Sesame Street and 10 students who did not. So in SPSS, and I want to just remind all of you that and I went through this in the first video, but you just go to this URL and then you can access SPSS using your LA Valley College email address. And I also wanted to point you to this other document that I posted where it goes through the steps to use SPSS, and we mainly went through all these steps in the first lab, but definitely look at this too for help if you need help. Okay, so in the lab, again, I'm just going to go through how to open the lab because I think that can get a little tricky. So I went through all the steps, right? So I went through all the steps and I'm at this point. So in order to upload a lab, we want to press Files and then your home folder and then Upload Files, right? So then once you upload it, so you need to download the lab from the module in Canvas and then upload it here. So I already did that, so I'm just gonna load it. Oh, sorry, no, that's not how. I just need to do it. So in order to load into SPSS, once you open SPSS, you press File and then Open. And then Data. And number, we saved it in that home folder. And then you have to change files type to all types, all files. For some reason, I don't know, maybe yours might just show up automatically. Mine, I had to change it to all files because for some reason it saved really weird. So then I press open and here it is. So as you can see, this is where all the data is. We have the grades, and so again, we're comparing two different groups, right? One group, so let's go. So I just double clicked on group, and you can see what it looks like. For our SPSS data set, I already changed what the values look like. Sorry, I increased the size of this, and it got all weird. So not only did I put a label already for group, so what I call this group is whether watched Sesame Street. Oh, the label's too long. Oops. I'm gonna just change it to watch Sesame Street. I obviously do not know how to spell. Is that right? I think it's SEA. Sorry, let me look at. Wow, I can't remember. SESAME. Okay. I don't know if that's right. Okay. And then our values. So I put these labels in already. So a value of 0 is did not watch Sesame Street. And then a value of 1 is watch Sesame Street. Okay? Okay, so it's easier with data to see, instead of having all these words written out, to have just a value assigned to it. So 0 is did not watch Sesame Street, 1 is watch Sesame Street. And so if I go back um, to the data view, you can see the groups were assigned. So these ones are did watch Sesame Street, and these zeros are did not watch Sesame Street, right? And so again, each row is a participant. So this person got a grade of 86 and did watch Sesame Street. This person got an 87 and did watch Sesame Street, whereas this person did not. So they have a 0, they did not watch Sesame Street, and they got a 90. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna make this full screen. And actually, I want to make sure I'm not missing any steps. So I'm gonna go back to my lab. We looked at the variable view, and now let's do an independent t-test. Okay, so I made it large screen because it's easier for me to deal with. I'm gonna press analyze, and then compare means, and then we have an independent samples t-test. So press there. So our test variable, which is our outcome measure, so that is the average high school grade, or the grade that the participants have, right? So again, we're comparing if you watch Sesame Street as a child versus did not, what your high school grade is, if there's a significant difference between your high school grade. So I'm gonna just define groups as 1, 0. It's just putting in what your reference group is. So I wanna see if students who watched Sesame Street actually have a difference in score. And then let's see, what other options do I want to put in? Define groups. I want to, okay, right. So we learned about confidence intervals during the first lecture, I believe. So this is where you can adjust the confidence intervals. So I'm just going to keep it at 95%. You can change, we learned about confidence intervals, so it's just showing the amount that the statistic, the parameter that we calculate can vary. Okay, so then I'm just going to press OK, and then it spits out our t statistic. I want to make this, I guess I'll just press here. Okay, so as you can see, we have 10 participants who watched Sesame Street versus 10 participants who did not. The mean just for the Watch Sesame Street group is 93, and the standard deviation is 4.7, and the standard error is 1.4 or 1.5. Then for our participants who did not watch Sesame Street, we had 10 participants. The mean was at 85, the standard deviation was 4.2, and the standard error is 1.3. So then we're going to learn about F values and the significance. This is Levine's test for equality of variances, and it's just to look at if because we're comparing two different groups, it's hard to compare two different groups if the variance for this particular group versus the second group is not the same, right? So it's hard to compare two different groups if we have equality. I talked about the assumptions for an independent t-test, and this is the assumption that we have homogeneity of variance. Okay, so in order to compare two different groups, you want the variance within each of those groups to be the same. Otherwise, you can't compare them. So this is just telling us, yes, we can compare two different groups. And then this is our t-statistic. So our t-statistic calculated in SPSS was 4. It calculated our degrees of freedom too, right? So for degrees of freedom, we have group 1 minus 1 and group 2 minus 1. So the number of participants in group 1 minus 1, number of participants in group 2 minus 1. And that gives us 18, right? Because 10 minus 1 is 9, and then 10 minus 1 is also 9. And so if we add those two degrees of freedom together, our total degrees of freedom is 18. SPSS automatically calculates our the critical t value, so what t value to compare our t-statistic, right? So that's how we figure out significance. We calculate the t-statistic, and then from the table, we have our critical t. So if we're looking for a 0.05, something that's less than 0.05, or the alpha value of less than 0.05, we know that our critical t value is, I'm not sure for this problem what it is, but we solved that. And SPSS automatically calculates the t-statistic as well as compares it and knows the significance level of this t-statistic. So our significance level for this t-statistic is 0.001. This mean, oops, I keep trying to scroll right, but I have to manual scroll. So our mean difference between the two different groups. So the first group who watched Sesame Street was 93, and the second group was 85. So 93 minus 85, that difference is 8. And then this is our standard error difference. And then again, here's our confidence intervals. So this is the confidence interval of the difference. So it's looking at what the lower and upper of our mean difference could be. And then we also learned, these are measures of effect size. So Cohen's d, we learned about Cohen's d. And then it also gives us the estimate as well as the confidence interval for a Cohen's d. So I want you to know there's other measures of effect size, but I just want you to focus, Cohen's d is the most popular one. And I just want you to know, I don't want you to know how to calculate it, but that Cohen's d is a measure of effect size. And what effect size is looking at is how much, if this difference is actually a big difference or a small difference. When we calculate the t-statistic, we are seeing that, that yes, we're finding that there is a significant difference between the two groups, but it's not telling us how big or what the magnitude of that difference is. It's just saying that it's significantly different. And a measure of effect size tells us whether or not that difference is a really large effect, if it's very meaningful, or if it's very small. So we, as statisticians, we like to look at the p-value. That's where we usually look. But looking at the effect size, how big of a effect size there is, tells us how meaningful this difference is. So is it really meaningful that individuals who watch Sesame Street versus did not watch Sesame Street, is it that big of a difference that that you watched Sesame Street as a child versus did not? Okay. And so this is just looking through your results. And then, okay, so let's save our results. And let me walk you through that because that's actually very important. So what I'm going to do, and I did this in the first lab too, but I'm going to do this here. I'm going to export. So I went to File, then Export, and then I'm going to change the type to PDF because that's easier to deal with. And then I am going to go into temporary files. So, sorry, let me go slower. So I'm going to press Browse, and then I click into temporary files, and I'm going to say Lab 3 output. I'm just going to put my name again as, I'm going to save it. Okay, then I'm going to press OK. And then I'm going to get out of this expanded window, press the file, press the temporary files, and then I am going to download this. Because for the lab assignment, you want to download, submit both your output as well as a write-up. So now that I downloaded my output, let's just make sure it looks okay. So always make sure that your output looks okay. And this looks fine. So this has all the information that we had. Okay. And then for the write-up, this is an example of how you would write up your t-statistics. So what I'm looking for is that you mention, what the mean is, right? And any other descriptive statistics. So you could also write in the standard deviation, the number of participants, and then this is how you write up the t-statistic, what we found, and this actually matches what was in the output. And again, please do not just copy and paste this. This is just an example. I am going to give 0 points if you simply just copy and paste, or copy and paste something that's very similar to this. And I believe that is it. Please send me an email if you have questions about this lab. Or feel free to post in a discussion.